Hi everyone, good afternoon, not good morning. Welcome to the Rangers review. I don't know what to call it, Johnny, if it's the afternoon, because an afternoon briefing sounds weird.
Morning briefing stroke, afternoon briefing stroke, whatever.
Something. Yeah, here we are to talk about Rangers as ever, every day. Myself and Johnny, we're going to look back on yesterday's press conference, the Blue Room unveiling of Philippe Clement. We're going to talk about the director of football conversations. We're going to talk about what James Bisgrove had to say. So as ever, do get your comments in. Let us know what you want us to talk about. We'll try and get through it if we can. A reminder at the start, the morning briefing is brought to you by MPH Group, Scotland's award-winning family-run all-trade specialists covering all of mainland Scotland. All of the details are in the description, as you know. And to remind you, every service you opt for automatically enters you into winning a 5-star holiday in Mexico, which sounds not bad. So as I say, all the comments, all the links are in the comments for that as well. And we just want to give a mention to Lounge 72 under new ownership, just 20 minutes from Ibrox in Uddingston. They hosted a charity event, a karaoke competition in aid of St Andrew's Hospice. I believe it was Scottish Hospice's week last week. They hosted that on Saturday. So just a shout out to them. It was a national campaign week to highlight how people can get involved in supporting hospices. Be sure to check out Lounge 72, just 20 minutes from Ibrox as well, under that new ownership, as mentioned. And congratulations to all of them for that fantastic event at the weekend. Right, Johnny, let's get into it. We were both in the Blue Room yesterday. When I said this to Chris yesterday, but when I started this job a couple of years ago, I was told that being in the Blue Room was, a unique thing that you only did once every few years. And we've done 3 of these in the past 2 years. But there's a lot to get into. Saying a manager spoke very well is the most cliche thing in the world these days, even if he did. But I guess just to start, we were both there in the room. What did you make of the whole event? What did you make of how Bisgrove spoke and how Philippe Clement spoke for the first time as Rangers manager?
Well, first of all, Philippe Clement, I think we should start there, given he's the new manager. Yeah. I thought was terrific. I have to say, I think like most people, I would say the overall cast of characters that Rangers were looking at, none of them grabbed me as being absolutely 100% a perfect fit. Mm-hmm. But certainly of the candidates, I've said this before on this pod, he was the one that to me looked like the best fit, given that he's won 3 trophies with 2 clubs in terms of league trophies in Belgium. He's obviously gone to Monaco, and was listening to a podcast earlier today with Adam Thornton, actually. It was really, really good and detailed about what happened in Monaco and where he had good points and where he had bad points. And I don't think you can characterise his period as a failure over in France, but certainly wasn't at the same level as what he achieved in Belgium. But it's the Belgian spell that most defines what he's all about. And I have to say that my sort of general feeling of tempered enthusiasm was ratcheted up somewhat having met him in person. Not only did I sit and watch the broadcast presser, which Josh, you were obviously reporting on with Chris and asking questions in, but I was doing the Sunday sit down for the Herald. So I sat down with Philippe Clement for another 10-15 minutes, and he's a hugely warm and engaging character, but also has that sort of edge about him where you just wouldn't want to cross him. The guy's 6'3". I can confirm he's built like a tank. He's a big guy as well as being tall, and he's got that stare. I think he used that a couple of times in the press conference. A couple of questions he perceived to be.
He's one of these guys who I think you're going to be. You don't know. You can't trust that he's joking, can you? Because there's a couple of times where he did make a joke, and everyone was like, "Okay, is it okay to laugh now?" Because you're right. He has got stature. He has not only is he a big guy, but I think he carries himself as that. So I agree with that. I think he'll take a bit of time to maybe learn his sense of humour.
Yeah, he's definitely got an edge to him. There's no doubt about that. But he's also got a charisma in the room. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a successful Rangers manager. I can confirm, having been in the room when Pedro Caixinha was appointed, he had all the charisma in the world. And people went out from that saying, wow, that guy lights up a room. He's got a lot of charisma. And obviously, we know it didn't work out for Pedro. So that's not a guarantee of anything. But in terms of his ability to handle the media, I thought there was a stark contrast to, for example, Michael Beale, less open, less, I think, tempted to go down a wee rabbit hole with his answers to a certain question. I think he was asked directly, it might have been by STV, about whether or not what needed to be fixed in this Rangers team. And rather than open up and say, well, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I thought it was notable that he said, well, I think you can all see what's been happening. You'll all have your own opinions, but I have more information than you. So given that people that are going to be coming up against me are going to be watching this, they don't know an awful lot about me, I'm going to keep my cards close to my chest on this. And I thought, that's a bit of a marked move away from Michael Beale, who was basically an open book. Now, that was great for us, and it was great to give us things to get our teeth into. I wonder if Michael Beale, as he develops in his managerial career, will reflect on his time with Rangers and think that he could have done with being a little bit more introspective at times, to more manage the message. I think during Beale's reign, I think quite often the message just got completely lost because there was so much being said.
Yeah,
I remember Walter Smith's time in charge. He used to make 1 or 2 points, and then the rest of the presser was very bland deliberately, because what he was trying to do was he was trying to create a specific message, a specific point of view, and I felt like yesterday that we're going to start seeing that from this manager. But certainly it was a good impression, Josh. I thought he came across as well as he possibly could have. And I left it a lot more positive about the appointment. And I already thought it was the best appointment that could have been made. So I'm quietly confident that this guy will come in and improve Rangers, put it that way.
Yeah, I think I remember writing a newsletter, must have been January or February of this year, and I was kind of praising Michael Beale's press conferences, because press conferences can also, if you go to them a lot, they can be boring if it's just mundane answers and it's there's not much charisma behind it. But I think that the real lesson from Beale's time in charge is that when you're winning and when things are going well, brilliant. But if the results start to fall, then I think that kind of approach at a press conference maybe doesn't work as much. I think he's someone who loves talking about football, and that came across initially. But I agree with you by the end. I think the difficulty is if you say a lot, then there's not only is there more for people to misconstrue, but people are going to take something you say and translate it into what that means for them. So again, the more that comes out, I think that's where a lot of confusion came into it. And I think Clement, my impression, how I'd sum up, Johnny, was that I don't think Clement went in there thinking, this is a message I want to get across, this is what I want supporters to think about my style of football, this is what I feel like he just went in almost unrehearsed and was quite practical in some senses. You know, he spoke about the need to be realistic with expectations, because there's a number of games in the next few weeks and not much time on the training pitch. He's not even going to have the whole squad back until the end of the week because of internationals. But what came through, I think, and there's a comment, if I can find it, which spoke about this from Bob White, saying he missed the pressure at Monaco. He said he wants that pressure. He does seem like the type of character, and he translated this to back his experience at Bruges. He seems like the type of character who is really kind of chasing that pressure in that environment in his managerial career. And I thought that came across when he was speaking about not only the fact that he's excited to be at the club and it's a great opportunity, but he takes it at quite a unique point in time. And maybe not every manager, where he is in his career when he's had this kind of success and then he's had a difficult end to his last job, it's a key move for him as well in his managerial career. So I think it's interesting that he's really chasing this opportunity at this time as well, because as we know, and as came out yesterday at the press conference as well, that this wasn't his only option, and there was options that on a financial basis would have been better for him than coming to Ibrox.
Yeah, listen, one of the things that we kind of went into that's kind of embargoed, so I can't really talk about it, was the fact that at his previous club, you know, Bruges is a big club. There's no doubt about that. Like, so I'm not casting aspersions on Bruges. They've got 29,000, so they're smaller than certainly Rangers are. But Monaco, despite being a big club and a huge name in European football, who've had great success in terms of developing players. You think of the guys that have come through, Mbappe, the first one that comes to mind, but obviously they've sold players.
To Madrid,
Even under Clement's reign, there was players that have been sold. You think of them as a big name in European football, but the stadium only holds 4,000 or 5,000, doesn't it? So
yeah,
that's
no
a big
thanks.
jump.
I spoke to someone. A couple of people who worked with Clement in Monaco, and that is he said there's pressure to make European football, but in terms of fan pressure, it's just at the complete low end of the scale, isn't it?
And I think it's safe to say, without breaking anything, that there's an obvious attraction in going from a big club with no expectation to a big club with big expectation for a guy who wants to promote himself and move on with his career. What I would say about him, just having met him in person, very, very direct, Josh. I don't think this is a guy that's going to be struggling to say harsh truths. I think he's kind of blunt, almost advocate-esque in his sort of direct, blunt, confident, absolutely, I think, settled in his methods. This is not a young manager, a new manager. This is a guy that's won before. He's won as a player. He's been an international player. And I think he's won 3 leagues as a player, and he's won 3 leagues as a manager. So he's a guy who's had that winning mentality, and it was obvious from talking to him that he knows what to do. It might not work, but he knows what he's going to do, and it was. I think he did a really, really good job, and I know, having to speak in of the other people that were there, Josh. It wasn't just me, you, and Chris. There was, a huge selection of media guys, and the general feeling in the room was that he'd impressed. I don't think there was anyone going away from that thinking that Clement hadn't put up a good showing. And I think, looking back, I think there was some people that felt that Michael Beale, they weren't sure about Michael Beale, and certainly with Gio's not a lovely guy, but wasn't a kind of very dynamic press conference performer. So for me, of the last 3 managers, he's given the best account of himself on day one. But there's a huge difference, Josh. We know this, between performing in a press conference and then translating that to the football pitch.
Yeah. A few comments at the back of that, Johnny. Pete saying, for me, this appointment excites me much more than Gerrard, Gio and Beale. Much more proven as a manager. Jay says, he speaks well. Hopefully he's the right man for the job. I'll back him. He's our new manager after all. Just hope he gives the fans give him time. He's clearly going to need time to get things back on track. And then I think this comment, which sums it up, I like Clement, but I'd like any manager who does well with the team. And that's a key thing for all the conversation about press conferences. It actually doesn't really matter at the end of the day. But interesting nonetheless to be in the Blue Room yesterday. Let's get on to some of the things that he did say. I want to speak about backroom staff, director of football, his playing style, some of the things that James Bisgrove had to say as well. Didn't give too much away on the style of play front, if you compare it maybe to previous managers as well. I think it's quite well documented, and we've had loads and loads of content in the website about Clement, thousands of words if you want to read about what type of manager he is and what he's like in training and a bit of his philosophy. I asked James Bisgrove about this. I said, how important was it to get a manager in that? I think Kevin Muscat's football, you'd have looked at that and you'd have thought, do you know what, domestically that really can work for Rangers. I think the difficulty with it would have been the squad isn't on the face of things suited to it, both from a point of view of there's not depth in wide areas. I don't think there's really dynamic players at full back. For many reasons, I think the squad's kind of lopsided to what Muscat would have wanted, but also there's just, can you teach that style mid-season? And therefore, can you get the short-term buy-in to have the long-term success? Whereas I think what they'll hope that Clement will give them is, okay, here's someone who's come into a club twice already mid-season. Genk Monaco came into the club mid-season and stabilised and done well before going on, especially in Belgium, to have that long-term success and win league titles. I think that's the sweet spot they're hoping for. He didn't give much away in terms of style of play. He speaks about kind of patterns of play, automatisms is the word he keeps using in all his media outlets, and interchanging of positions, attacking football, dominant football. He spoke about his first job and how he played dominant football there, even though they were at the bottom of the table. And one of the details that's in the piece I did about him was kind of a few of the ways that he went about changing the players' mentality, having spoken to people in that dressing room to kind of lift their expectations from we can only survive from relegation in this league till we can go and do bigger and better things. But in terms of the actual means that are going to be used to achieve that, Johnny, what do you make of it so far? What are you expecting in terms of what lineup he used? Is he going to use 2 strikers? How is he going to use his fullbacks? Because I think he is someone who's instead of cramming players into a system and style that he wants, it will be a little bit more of a kind of meet me halfway. I want to play positions that are comfortable for you, instead of trying to crowbar you into things that you're not going to be as good at.
I thought his answer on Cyril Dessers was quite interesting, because it was a perfect opportunity for him to come out and say, I know Cyril well, I've seen him play a lot. He did say that, but it was the way he said it. And it was kind of like, don't think because he's played in Belgium that he's going to be a big player for me.
Yeah.
I always felt like, that almost seems like a slight rebuke.
It wasn't, if you compare it to like previous press conferences where maybe, and obviously the association is made because of the Belgium link, but I think the expectation of that answer would have maybe been, he's great and I'm going to get the best out of him. Whereas he actually went on to say, effectively, don't think he's going to be at the forefront of my team just because he's played in similar leagues or because he's Belgian or whatever.
Yeah, which was an odd thing to say if he is going to be at the forefront of the team, I would suggest.
Yeah.
But listen, we've seen enough of Dessers to, I think, make up our minds, and it's up to Cyril to go out there and prove us wrong in the media and in the fan base, because I think the feeling on his performances to date have kind of been quite universal. But in terms of how they're going to play that, I think that's what makes Saturday so exciting, Josh. I wasn't planning on being there, and I'm going to be there now, because I'm excited to hear what he's got to say after the game, after he experienced his Ibrox, and I'm also excited to just see how he perceives this Rangers squad. He's watched every game so far this season, so he's seen what we've all seen. He'll know it's not good enough, but I wonder how his football mind will interpret it. Will he see something in those players that we haven't seen because we get fixed in our ways? We think James Tavernier couldn't play right midfield. Well, maybe he'll have a completely different opinion. Maybe he'll be like Derek and want to play James Tavernier up front. We don't know. Anything could happen.
I'd be surprised.
Pedro came in and played Andy Halliday at left centre back.
Maybe not the best example of a manager making wise decisions. But I take what you mean. I think we can get caught up in, he's played a 4-2-3-1, he's played a 4-3-3, and that can mean so many different things. Formations change, whether you're building play, whether you're attacking the box, whether you're trying to progress play. It can change on and off the ball. I think the more interesting thing for me is, although Saturday, I don't think it's going to be hopefully the best Rangers performance you see under Philippe Clement, but you hopefully will see some of the ideas as well. And when he talks about automatisms, I spoke about this with Thomas Buffel, who Thomas Buffel's been name checked everywhere. He's
you got him first, mate. I thought that was it worked out being quite a good move by you there.
Yeah, it worked out well. So, but he was great to speak to. Point being, you can read some kind of in-depth thoughts from him on the website. But when he's speaking about automatisms, I think what's interesting is Clement is obviously a manager who has, I think there's different degrees of managers. There's some like Gio who I think adapt a lot to the opposition, and that's why it worked so well in Europe. That's why, because you can adapt your game plan to the opposition's weaknesses, and tailored, very good for one-off games, especially for a cup manager. But maybe when it's about trying to break teams down consistently, that doesn't suit the game state as much. I think you have managers, maybe the other side of things, Steven Gerrard, I think wasn't very adaptable. That brought domestic success eventually, but you kind of knew exactly what his team was going to try to do. I think maybe where Clement sits is somewhere in the middle, where he'll be adaptable in the sense that he'll adapt what he's going to do to his players, but then he will kind of stick with it. I don't think you're going to see him change things loads and loads dependent on the opposition domestically. But equally, I think he will come in and he'll try and play a brand of football that's suited to the players while still having these patterns of play and the way that you defend and attack the box and stuff that's quite a staple of modern football as well. And he's also a hands-on coach. We can get on to talk about the backroom staff, Johnny, but he's a hands-on coach. He's someone who takes a lot of the sessions himself. And while it's only him and one other that have come over at the moment, the interim coaching team will stay involved, and he was asked about that as well. But in terms of, we're going to get into what team will start at the weekend and try and predict it. We'll maybe need to wait for an injury update at the pre-match press conference. But is there anything, Johnny, that you're keeping a specific eye out for, whether it be who's his left back from the start? Is he going to give Ridvan a run of games? Does he play with two strikers from the off? I think although we don't know what number of players are going to come back, there will be quite a lot to learn from this first game, because equally there's no time between games for these next 7 games. It's a double game week for the next 3-4 weeks until the next international break. So I think you will probably see something that he's going to try and stick with over these next 7 games at the weekend.
Yeah, I think he had a very, very pronounced managerial bounce when he went in at Monaco.
Yeah.
One of the things that many people say when they're talking about his spell there was that he's a good man manager in terms of getting his arm around players and getting the best out of them. So I think you would hope to see that replicated at Ibrox. Now, whether or not that will be sexy football on the back of that, that's another story. I suspect it's going to be difficult to get that happening. One of the things that I expect to see from a Clement side will be that they push up and press in that final third and press aggressively and set traps and swarm all over the opponents. Where they might struggle with that is if in Scotland teams like Livingston and Ross County just basically boot the ball over the press. So what can you do if you can't press? Then he has to have a plan B, and that's something that I think he'll need to keep in mind. He's never faced a low block like this. I was listening to a French football journalist saying, "Oh well, teams sit in against Monaco." Yeah, they do, but they don't sit in like sitting in Scotland. It's what you perceive to be the low block. People would say would be an attacking setup for Scottish football against Rangers and Celtic in their home stadiums. It's the low block, not the low block. So that's going to be interesting how he handles that, because it's also been said that sometimes his teams kind of ran out of ideas if they were facing that kind of low defensive line. Now, that might be personnel. It might be something to do with his overarching philosophy, and we won't know until that's tested here in Scottish football. But you know what, Josh, and I think this is an important point. I think we, as lovers of the technical elements of the game, sometimes can get a little bit carried away with it. And, you forget that Walter Smith, for example, only 15 years ago, and I know the game has changed, but it wasn't that long ago. It wasn't a completely different epoch. Was putting together sides that had variation enough that they were good on set pieces. They were physically strong. They had players capable of pinging it in from 30 yards. They had players on the bench who could come in and change a game. They had physical strength. It wasn't just really, really advanced high level triangles that were used to tear people apart in the Ange Postecoglou style. There's other ways to win football games. You don't always have to be a philosophy manager that piles men forward in a particularly aggressive way to score lots of goals to win games. There's plenty of ways to skin a cat, and I just think that Rangers need a manager that understands that it's win at all costs. Just get that in your head early doors. That's the toughest thing, because in other clubs, dare I say it, I know they was under pressure at Bruges, but I don't think it'll be quite the same level of pressure that he's faced anywhere before as he's going to face now in this job. And he just has to understand that a draw is a catastrophe here. That's the way it is.
Yeah, and you can be booed off after a win because there's always going to be a bigger picture. He obviously does. I think we'll come back to that, but I think a big part of this conversation as well is Rangers are heavy favourites for the League Cup. By no means can you say that it's a certainty, because they've not won it in so long. And we've had these conversations when they've been the only side of the old firm left, and even the domestic cups in recent years, thinking back to the 55 season, and not won it. But there's a huge opportunity there to do something and create that image of him winning a trophy early on, which even if he's not knocked out Celtic in that competition, certainly won't harm his chances. But just to go back to your point there, I think you're right in that. I think a big thing for me, you see it when you go to Ibrox all the time. People want to be entertained.
Of course.
People want to win first, right? People want to win first. People want to be entertained. But I think the most important thing is that people see kind of longevity in the process, and they think, do you know what? Unlike the last 2 seasons, it's got to just before the managers were sacked, and people might say, listen, if we leave this any longer, you can see where this is going. If we leave this any longer, we're going to be 7 points behind this season, 9 points behind last season, and by that point, you give a new manager a mountain to climb coming in. Now that has happened in both seasons. The managers have been sacked by the time, arguably, I don't think they're too far behind this season, but they're certainly not, and as Clement put it yesterday, an advantageous position. What people need to see, I think, is reasons that they should be optimistic, reasons to buy in. Stevie's got a great column on the website about this today, and in effect, he's saying, look, I just want to enjoy what I'm watching. But I think beyond that, people need to believe what they're watching will eventually take them to silverware, which is what it's all about, especially here. So I'm interested to see how he does that. Interested to see what players he is going to rely on in the final third, because there's a lot still to click into gear. He has got a few players who are somewhat in form. I think Abdallah Sima kind of went under the radar a bit, but he started to score relatively consistently. I think Rabbi Matondo is someone you will be able to get the best out of when he comes back from injury. You've got Todd Cantwell back in training. Raskin, Danilo's there with his mask on. So there is quality in that squad, but it's about, I guess, getting much more out of players that haven't shown it so far this season. And he made an interesting comment on that before we move on to what James Bisgrove had to say. I can't remember off the top of my head, but in effect, he said, I've watched these games, and something I've seen a lot is players taking things into their own hands. And that happens when players are frustrated. And that's why I think Clement is an ideal candidate in theory in this circumstance, because from everything I've spoken to people about and learned, man management is something that he excels at. To use an example, one of the first things he did when he went into his managerial career at Beveren, and Beveren was the example of the club he used yesterday, and when he was speaking about playing, attacking, dominating football, even with a team that's not at the top of the league. One of the first things he did was outsource the psychologist. Before, these things were kind of in-house in a relatively small club, so the budget, I think, had to be extended for that. And he did that to effectively get an individual report for each player, so that he knew how to effectively tailor his man management to them, and what messages to give them, how to make sure players reacted. And I think that, from everything I've learned, that's quite an anecdote of, again, the focus that he puts on man management as a manager, which is going to be crucial to get more out of the players that they're showing at the moment. Because we're still, what are we, middle of October, Johnny, and when we're still speaking about 3 of Rangers' summer signings, two Sima and Butland having shown enough consistently to get excited about. Danilo got injured before he could get into, you get consistent minutes through the middle. I think Lammers is someone who, in my opinion, you can see has a lot of technical quality, but he's not infecting games, and I think his confidence is nosedived. Cifuentes clearly still adjusting to the pace of the game. Dowell, again, we've not seen him much. So the key, I think, is going to be, instead of maybe a system manager just fitting every player into what he wants to do, it is going to be trying to tailor the messages to certain players, trying to get more out of them than they're showing, because at the moment so far it doesn't look like a really strong squad, but I'm sure Clement will go in there and believe he can get more out of it.
I don't think it's a strong squad either, Josh, but I think it's better than what they've shown. We were all sitting here in July thinking we like the look of this rebuild under Michael Beale. We like the look of the specific profile of the players that he's brought in, and we think that this will work. The problem you've had, and Stevie highlighted this, is I think Stevie deserves a bit of credit for this. He always said, regardless, there's 4 players that Beale will be judged on: Cifuentes, Danilo, obviously
Lammers and
Dessers and Lammers. Sorry,
yeah,
that's a sign I'm getting old. So those 4, and it's clear those 4 are the ones where the money has been spent. Now, to be fair, Cifuentes only costs 1.2 million, but his wages are significant, and he's a player that teams in the Premier League were looking at over a long period. Celtic had a look at him as well. He is someone that's been attracting a lot of European clubs. So it was a bit of a coup to get him here, and it was certainly an extended, protracted transfer negotiation to get that through, and they've managed to do that. Those 4 were always going to be the key. And it's unfortunate then that the 2 guys that you could say have so far look like they're going to be a success, and Abdullah Sima and Jack Butland, are not part of those 4. But It's too early to be judging Danilo, that's for sure. He's just not had enough minutes, Josh, making any kind of assessment of either way, by the way, good or bad. It's just too early, just not seen enough. Dessers we've already touched on. Lammers, I totally agree with you. I think he's got skills, but he's not affecting games. I'd like to see Lammers pushed up as a number 9, as part of a 2 alongside someone else, just to see how that works. I'm not saying it'll work. I'm asking to see it so we can make a judgment. I don't think him as a 10 is working particularly well, but he's clearly got something about him. Getting those players, if he can, to perform will be a major coup if the new manager can do that, because fundamentally you have to say Cyril Dessers, Sam Lammers in particular are the ones you'd have to say have cost this manager his job.
Yeah. This leads us on to, I totally agree with that, because you look even at Lammers, that missing the Old Firm game. I know that the goal for Rusko was chopped off, but it's just these moments where if a player delivers in that moment, then you don't know how things change. So I totally agree with you in that comment of you'll be judged and kind of live or die by how those players started at Rangers, and obviously they haven't started well, which is why we're having that conversation. Director of football, some links to I think it was on Fabrizio Romanov's Twitter to I forget the guy's name. Is it Paul Jewell? No, it's someone Jewell. Sam Jewell, there we go. Sam Jewell, who for the vacant technical director role at Rangers, or director of football, sporting director, whatever you want to call that, which James Bisgrove spoke about yesterday. That's kind of been knocked down by sources at the club. But I don't know, maybe one of these situations, Johnny, a bit of there's no smoke without fire. Is that the right way around? This is one. Is that the one? Yeah, that's the one. It's definitely a position that Rangers, as James Bisgrove confirmed yesterday, I'll read his quotes. He said, "In the next few weeks, if not months, we're having live conversations at the moment. There are variables depending on the individuals the board believe has the best fit. I believe it will be imminent," speaking about the appointment of director of football, sporting director, technical director. We've spoken about this a lot. I think we're both on the director of football train. I guess just to summarise the argument before to get into a few of the other things Bisgrove said about it, I think that it's not a golden bullet situation where one sporting director is the answer to everything. I just think that if you look at what their job remit is, it provides more continuity than managers. Their goal and their aims are long-term as opposed to short-term. And when things happen, like maybe at some clubs, a manager always has a final say on transfers. But I believe, and I think more frequently it'll be a case of it's a joint decision. Just as, I guess, if any company's spending 3-4 million pounds on something, it's probably going to be there's going to be some fleshed out thinking about that, arguments either way, people with contrasting opinions, and it's not always just a set decision of yes or no, this is going to be good. It's weighing it up with contract length, who's in the squad at the moment. Someone like Dessers, can he play for another manager if Beale isn't successful this summer? Someone like Lammers, there's so much to weigh up, and I think a sporting director within that conversation helps, not least because, as we're speaking about so many Blue Room press conferences over the past few years, managers' lifespans are short. To take on to what James Bisgrove said yesterday, said Philippe will make an assessment on the squad to identify how we increase performance and improve results, and Philippe will give an assessment to the board where he sees the strengths and the weaknesses. That for me is that is encapsulation of why Rangers need a sporting director. Because yes, a manager should, when a new manager come in, should have a say in the transfers. There's no point in making him work with a group of players who won't work to his style. But I think Rangers squads too often in the last few years has kind of been an amalgamation of just that. Different managers assessing different things, different managers having a different degree of control over transfers. Obviously, Beale had a greater say over Giovanni Van Bronckhorst. And that leads you to, I think that plays a big part in the situation that we're talking about just now. The sporting director, I think, should negate the need to always rebuild, but it should be more about refreshing the squad. And listen, Rangers still had a sporting director in place last season when all this was starting, so it's not to say that this job's been done particularly well in the past. It's always hard to judge because we don't know the exact remit. There's a lot in there to unpack, Johnny, but I think the culmination is a sporting director, while it might not solve everything, it's probably going to be a net positive, and I think it's definitely a move that the Rangers need to make, and it sounds like it's one they're about to.
Yeah, absolutely. What he said actually in the presser was, I think he said it was going to be weeks if not months. And I think what he meant was weeks, not months, because he went on to say imminent.
Mm-hmm.
Listen, I think it's fairly clear that the board feel that they made an error in not immediately replacing Ross Wilson. Now, sources at the club have been pretty clear that, and listen, they were briefing at the time, people that we were speaking to within the club were briefing at the time that the work that Beale was doing had been done for him when Ross Wilson left. You know, it wasn't like he just took over the reins. Cyril Dessers has been on Rangers' radar for years. This is something Cyril admitted himself in the press conference when he joined. Nicholas Raskin was not a Michael Beale signing. That's a club signing that had been in place for a long time, that had been monitored when Michael Beale wasn't the manager. So while Beale might have been the first person to recommend him initially or whatever, we don't know. But there's a good few of these signings that were made were not, you know, Michael Beale saying, I want him and I want him and I want him. I mean,
but
you can
Johnny, to come back, agree with you on Raskin, agree with you, but to come back on that, what was the line Beale said about you'll be able to trace?
That's what I was going to say.
Okay.
I was going to
continue.
Dujon Sterling was certainly a Michael Beale signing. If you go through them, do you think Jack Butland was a Michael Beale signing? Probably someone that Beale's aware of from his time down south, being made aware by an agent that he's available on a free, and it just seems like an obvious one. I don't think Jack Butland would have been on Rangers' radar given that he was contracted to a Premier League club and on big wages. I might be wrong about that, but Dujon Sterling, certainly a guy who's worked with Michael Beale in the past. You look at Kieran Dowell, again, is that one that Michael Beale's picked up on the back of a recommendation, seen him perform in the Championship? I would suspect so.
Yeah.
Danilo, we don't know. Is that a club one? But I think Dessers, we do know that was part of it. Cifuentes has been on Rangers' radar for a long time, mate. That is not a Michael Beale one necessarily. I think that's another one that the club have been looking at. So it wasn't as if Michael Beale was completely left to it. You know, there'd been work done up to that point, work that had been done over a number of months and potentially up to a year. But I think once you get to that point where one director of football leaves, you should bring in another director of football to oversee that process and to make sure that anyone's coming in at that point is going to be suitable for Rangers and suitable for the squad that they have. I think what's been left for this new manager is quite lopsided. You look at the wide players, Scott Wright, Sima, who else is there that can play wide?
Matondo, and I think Matondo's someone who'll do well under the new manager, but you're right. I mean, if hypothetically, say you had a manager like Muscat, who I think relied on playing with, you know, a lot of vertical play and inverted players out wide, either wide forwards or wingers, you've got no one to fill that right-sided void. And I think that, again, that comes into, it's difficult because maybe the difference this summer is if you have a sporting director in there, there's a little bit more give and take. And let's say 9 signings, let's say 6 or 7 you can directly attribute. I would argue about 6 or 7 are more directly attributable to Beale. Maybe that's reduced a little bit. And again, it's not so much that a sporting director should have come in this summer and signed all the players. I don't think that at all. Again, you looked at January and someone like Todd Cantwell, I think very much was a Michael Beale signing.
Yeah, absolutely.
He went and spoke to him. And it worked perfectly because, and that was that's a good example of why I think the summer people were quite optimistic about it. But maybe having a sporting director in there, not only does it offer a bit more longevity between managers, so hypothetically, a sporting director perhaps in the summer is thinking, okay, but if Rangers do lose their 3 of the first 7 games, then perhaps we do need to think about the squad a little bit more holistically. And has it got too many players who can do exactly what Beale wants, but not enough who are going to, if we wanted to go and get someone like Muscat, who can play in those wide positions. So I think it's more than being a golden bullet conversation. It's about giving you a better chance of having continuity and safeguarding the club. I think it was actually Beale, press conference quote, that was the term he used, safeguarding the club between managers, because Rangers might have only had 19 in their history, but they've had a good few in the last few years. If they're coming into the club now, again, I don't think it's a case of they should come in and they should have free reign over the transfers. The sporting director instead of the manager. Ross Wilson kind of famously said at the last AGM that I do not sign players was the quote. Again, I don't think it was Beale just sitting on Y-Scout saying I want this, this, and this. There's obviously a head of scouting, head of recruitment in there, who has a big say in it as well. But I don't think there's. I guess to summarise it, Johnny, I don't think wherever you land on this conversation, I think everyone could probably agree that it can be done better, and bringing in someone with expertise in that area is going to help it be done better over the course.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I've been an advocate of a director of football in here and in print and on the website for a long, long time. You need someone who's got that broader remit. And listen, we're talking about recruitment, Josh, and the problem with this is that the director of football's job is a lot wider than recruitment.
Yeah, exactly.
There's an article, a great article on our sister website, the Heart Standards, which is launched recently, and it's talking to Joe Savage, who's Hearts director of football. And he's basically saying the thing that grinds his gears the most as a director of football is fans saying, you sign the players. And he's saying, no, the manager says I need a right back who's aggressive and will get up and down the line. And we go and find 5 that could be potentially signed by Hearts. Yep. And then the manager makes his discussions, makes his investigations, and decides which one he wants. And I think almost part of this is almost as well, not just the media getting used to this idea, but fans and understanding what's happened with Michael Beale and why that means that there is a director of football required. And I think that's going to take still probably a few more years in Scotland, but maybe Rangers fans are now at the stage where they go, yeah, that sporting director of football role is just a role that you need to give you that kind of that level of continuity. What I do think, though, mate, is, and I think this is absolutely imperative, please, Rangers, take this Johnny McFarlane nonsense on board, which is the following. When Rangers hire a sporting director or a director of football, keep him away from everything, right? If a player's getting signed, don't have him with a comment at the bottom. This should, to me, the director of football role should be a kind of background role.
Okay.
It should not be front-facing. I think the problem with Ross Wilson, and I've said this, I would say this to Ross if I spoke to him, I think he was perceived to be around when things were going well, and the moment things were going badly, he disappeared. Because when you were signing Aaron Ramsey, there he was, the meme of Ross Wilson in the background smiling or sticking his head out. Whenever there was a celebration, 55, the Scottish Cup, the Europa League games, you'd often see Ross, maybe Europa League games is unfair actually, because off the top of my head I can't think of any, but certainly cup finals, the 55, Ross Wilson's in and amongst it, celebrating. I just think that opens up the door for fans to say, the minute that something goes wrong or a transfer goes wrong, where is he? And it encourages that sense of, we need to change the director of football. The narrative emerges of, we need to sack the director of football. For the director of football to work, Josh, it needs to be a long-term appointment. You can't change director of football.
Yeah.
So to avoid that level of scrutiny and that sort of almost, I don't want to use it, but I'm just going to say it, like kind of the toxicity that builds, it needs to be someone in the background just doing work and not having any ego about the work they do. And I think that's really important for the next director of football. It should be more like one of the other directors you don't hear from. Maybe you'll do an interview with Rangers TV about the women's team or what's happening in the youth academy or with the Rangers Review or with the Times or the Herald or whatever, once in a while. But it shouldn't be perceived to be someone that is front and centre. I think that's the manager's role. It's a manager's role to be the face of Rangers Football Club, and that's the way it's always been. And I think that's the right way for the future. So that would be my take on it. I don't know what you feel about that, Josh.
Yeah, I think if you're publicly visible, you always have to be publicly visible when things are going right and wrong. I think in Germany, for example, there's more, a sporting director has more kind of media presence, more of an expectation to be there in front of the media. I think clubs need...
Part of it is because the media understand director of football.
True. And I think a club needs, especially a club like Rangers, you need figureheads who people can praise and blame, or and I think now having a CEO, there's clear public figurehead, as you see yesterday with James Bisgrove. That's a big bottle of Coke there, not a fancy
I had
glass.
to drag a two. I was in a hurry to get up here, as you know, because I was running late as always.
Wow,
so the only thing I could grab was this 2-litre bottle of Diet Coke.
Well, there you go. But anyway, listen, we could speak all day, and we've got lots more podcasts to come this week. Johnny, I'm just going to read out this one comment, if I can find it, from Direction Home, who says, "These pods have missed Johnny more than I thought they would have." So there you go. Take that.
Thanks, Mum.
And then Sammy also says, "Great to see you on the pod, Johnny. Don't be a stranger." Yeah, Derek's still not back, so we're still surviving without him.
He'll be the big man.
He's in Austria and Vienna and Bratislava.
Yeah, Vienna, so he is. Right, okay. Yeah. He did mention that last time I was on with him, but I completely forgot. I tried to phone him about something today, and I got that, that scary ringtone where you think, how much is this phone call going to cost me?
Yeah.
But he didn't answer. So I'm assuming he's having a good time, given that he blanked me.
Quite right. Derek, if you're listening, enjoy it, mate. I'm sure he will absolutely not be listening, especially not 45 minutes into a podcast. But we will be back. We'll be back tomorrow and Friday. We've got lots to look ahead to in terms of the game on Saturday. We'll try and predict our teams, although I don't think we'll be very successful with that. We'll have press conference coverage. Lots more to come on the members section as well. Not got any members videos up this week, but don't worry, that will be rectified over the next few days. Until then, we'll be back at the normal time of 9:30 tomorrow morning. Thanks for joining us for today's afternoon briefing, and we'll speak to you soon. Bye for now.